The asphalt radiates a suffocating, almost visible heat, warping the air above the endlessly busy intersection. You stand at the edge of the pavement, a man of 40 years, watching the frantic pulse of the city. You wear a tailored navy blue blazer over a crisp, light-colored shirt, the top button left undone, allowing a faint breeze to cool your neck against the oppressive midday glare. All around you, the relentless machinery of urban survival grinds on. Hundreds of people, draped in heavy suits and anxious expressions, rush past your shoulders. Their eyes are locked straight ahead, their minds consumed by deadlines, mortgages, and the desperate, unceasing sprint of the daily grind. The harsh sun beats down relentlessly on the concrete, a physical weight pressing against your shoulders. The sheer exhaustion of the scene before you makes you take a slow, deliberate step backward. You retreat from the blinding glare and step into the profound, enveloping shade of an ancient oak tree standing silently on the edge of the sidewalk. The shift is instantaneous. The temperature drops. The deafening roar of traffic seems to muffle beneath the massive, sprawling canopy of green leaves. You raise your hand and press your palm flat against the thick, deeply furrowed bark of the trunk. The wood is solid, unyielding, carrying the quiet history of decades. Standing there, feeling the rough texture beneath your fingertips, you quietly recite a financial truth to yourself, a fundamental rule of existence that the rushing crowd out in the sun has entirely forgotten. Building true wealth is exactly like planting a tree. In the very beginning, a seed is terribly fragile. As the planter, you have to break your back every single day. You bend over, scraping the dry earth, carrying heavy buckets of water just to keep the fragile sapling alive. You pour your sweat and your youth into the dirt, and for the longest time, you see absolutely nothing in return. The stem remains thin. The leaves are sparse. It feels like a futile exhaustion of your life force, but the magic, the true mechanism of survival, happens completely out of sight, buried deep underground in the pitch-black darkness. While you are breaking your back carrying water, the roots are silently pushing downward. They tear through packed dirt, fracture layers of solid rock, and reach deeper and deeper until they strike an eternal, underground aquifer. Once those roots tap into that endless source of water, the game changes forever. The tree takes on a life of its own. It grows massive and unshakable. The planter no longer needs to wake up at the crack of dawn to carry heavy buckets of water. You can simply sit back, rest your weary bones, and enjoy the cool shade and the sweet, falling fruit, year after year, decade after decade. You turn your calm gaze back to the intersection, watching the sea of exhausted faces. The tragedy is palpable. Almost everyone out there is carrying a bucket. They wake up every morning, gripping the handles until their knuckles turn white, hauling their water. Some carry small buckets. Others proudly carry massive gilded buckets, representing prestigious titles and high salaries of 6 figures. They pour their water every single day, exhausting their bodies and their minds. But their trees never grow. They never provide shade. Because they have planted their seeds in a concrete box, entirely devoid of roots, they are trapped in a perpetual cycle of watering. The moment they get sick, the moment they are laid off, the moment they stop carrying that bucket, the water stops, and their financial tree withers and dies almost instantly. They are captives, proudly parading their heavy buckets, utterly blind to the fact that they are slowly working themselves into the grave. You press your fingers harder against the oak. The roughness of the bark grounds you in the present, but only for a lingering second. As you slowly drag your fingertips across the deep, jagged grooves of the ancient wood, the sensation beneath your skin begins to shift. The dry, sun-baked bark suddenly feels polished, yet equally scarred. It feels like the worn surface of a heavy, solid ebony desk. The acrid smell of city exhaust and melting asphalt begins to dissolve, replaced by the rich, intoxicating aroma of cured leather and thick, heavy cigar smoke. The chaotic blare of car horns fades into a rhythmic, methodical tapping, the sound of a blunt pencil striking wood. The shade of the oak tree dissolves into the dim, imposing atmosphere of an office from 3 decades ago. You blink, and the man of 40 is gone. You are 9 years old again, sitting with bated breath, about to hear the brutal, unfiltered truth of how the world truly operates. The bright heat of the street fades away. Suddenly, you are in a cool, quiet office that smells like old wood and cigar smoke. You are sitting on the edge of a big leather chair, your feet swinging above the floor. Next to you is your best friend, Mike. Both of you are wearing loose cotton t-shirts and summer shorts. Across the big wooden desk is Mr. Julian, Mike's father. He is a strong man, over 50 years old. He is wearing a simple polo shirt with the sleeves rolled up and plain khaki pants. He looks like a man who works hard and speaks plainly. You and Mike hold your breath. You are waiting for him to tell you the ultimate secret to getting rich. You expect a complicated math formula or a thick book full of hard words. Instead, Julian reaches for a wrinkled piece of yellow scrap paper. He picks up a short, dull wooden pencil. He does not give a grand speech. He just draws two very simple boxes on the paper. The pencil makes a loud scratching sound in the quiet room. He names the top box the income statement. He draws a line down the middle to show money coming in, which is income, and money going out, which are expenses. Under that, he draws a second box, called the balance sheet. He splits this box into two sides as well, assets and liabilities. Then, he stops drawing. He taps the dull end of his pencil right on the word asset. He looks straight at you. An asset, he says in a deep, firm voice, puts money into your pocket. He moves the pencil to the other side of the box and taps again. A liability takes money out of your pocket. You and Mike just stare at the paper. You feel deeply disappointed. It is way too easy. You think the great secret of rich people cannot just be a drawing meant for children and two simple rules. You wait for the hard part, but Julian just watches you both with a small, knowing smile. He sees that you are let down. Leaning back in his heavy chair, he explains a rule called keep it simple. He tells you that the biggest problem with adults is their pride. Adults go to college, get fancy degrees, and memorize thick books. Because everyone tells them they are smart, their egos grow very large. When you show these smart adults a drawing of two simple boxes, they feel insulted. They think it is a joke. To protect their pride, adults make money seem very complicated. They use big, confusing words to hide one scary truth. They do not know how to read basic numbers. Adults can read heavy books, Julian explains, but they cannot see the story that their money is telling them. They do not understand that you must watch the cash flow, the direction the money is moving. Because they are too proud to look at a simple drawing, they spend their whole lives buying things that take money out of their pockets. They show off these expensive things to their friends, completely fooling themselves into believing they bought real assets. At 9 years old, you do not fully understand how heavy his words are, but those dark pencil lines on that piece of scrap paper stick in your mind forever. As the days pass, the simple drawing does not fade away. Instead, they stretched out over the next 7 years, thickening into the rigid architecture of your reality. You are no longer 9. You are 16 years old, dressed in a faded, short-sleeved cotton shirt and worn denim jeans, sitting quietly with your friend Mike in the shadowy corner of Mr. Julian's sprawling office. It is the height of summer, yet the air inside this room is perfectly chilled, meticulously climate-controlled, preserving an atmosphere of absolute, calculating calm. You and Mike are officially part-time employees now, but your true compensation is the privilege of sitting in this very corner, blending into the heavy mahogany paneling, watching the apex predators of the financial world operate. At the center of the room sits Mr. Julian. Time has only sharpened his decisive edge. He remains a pillar of absolute tranquility, his posture relaxed, yet radiating an undeniable, quiet authority. Spread around his massive desk are the architects of his empire. There is Arthur, the accountant, a man whose eyes constantly dart behind thick spectacles, a quiet genius who translates human ambition into cold, unforgiving ledgers. Beside him is Harvey, the corporate lawyer, a broad-shouldered man who sits perfectly still, treating every spoken word as a potential liability to be neutralized. And then there is Chris. Chris is the broker. He is wearing a suit slightly too expensive, his smile slightly too polished, his hands moving with the frantic, persuasive energy of a man desperate to close a deal. He leans forward, tapping a glossy prospectus on the desk, pitching a new, aggressive real estate venture. He speaks of projected margins, of booming markets, of skyrocketing valuations. He uses all the intoxicating vocabulary of the middle class, spinning a web of guaranteed success. Mr. Julian listens. He does not nod. He does not smile. He simply steeples his fingers, letting the heavy silence stretch until it becomes physically uncomfortable for the broker. Sweat begins to bead on Chris's forehead. Sensing the cold, impenetrable wall of resistance, he plays what he foolishly believes to be his trump card. He leans in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, urgent whisper. With all due respect, sir, you cannot afford to miss this window. Everyone is doing it. It is the standard play. The temperature in the room seems to plummet. Arthur, the accountant, stops writing. Harvey, the lawyer, slowly looks up, an imperceptible smirk touching the corner of his mouth. You watch from the shadows, your 16-year-old heart suddenly beating a little faster against your ribs. You know that phrase. You have heard it 1,000 times in your own living room. It is the anthem of the working class. Mr. Julian's gaze turns completely hollow. He looks at Chris not as a business partner, but as a tragic, entirely predictable specimen of the herd. Everyone is doing it. Mr. Julian repeats softly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He slowly closes the glossy folder and slides it back across the smooth wood. Chris, if everyone is doing it, that is the exact reason I will not touch it. I do not pay you to herd me into the same slaughterhouse as the rest of the sheep. The dismissal is absolute. It is a physical blow. Chris swallows hard, his slick veneer cracking instantly. He gathers his papers with trembling, humiliated hands before quietly excusing himself from the room. Once the heavy oak door clicks shut, the tension evaporates. Mr. Julian turns his leather chair slightly, his piercing eyes finding you and Mike in the corner. He does not raise his voice. He speaks with the chilling clarity of a surgeon explaining a fatal disease. Look at the men remaining at this table. Mr. Julian says, gesturing politely to the accountant and the lawyer. The mob out on the street believes that intelligence is knowing every answer. They believe it means having a high-paying job, buying a massive house, and following the crowd into the exact same debts. They buy what their neighbors buy, because standing in the middle of a herd makes them feel safe. He leans forward, resting his forearms on the desk, his eyes burning into yours. True intelligence is the absolute refusal to play their game. I do not know everything, but I am wise enough to hire Arthur to tell me where the blood is leaking from my businesses, and I am wise enough to hire Harvey to build an impenetrable fortress around my cash flow. You do not get rich by standing in line with the crowd, Leo. You get rich by owning the ground the crowd is desperately standing on. You swallow hard, your fingers gripping the coarse fabric of your denim jeans. The lesson settles deep into your bones, heavy and undeniable. Wealth is not a frenzied scramble for the next hot tip. It is a cold, calculated orchestration of brilliant minds working relentlessly to protect a single, sacred mechanism, the cash flow. Yet, as you sit there absorbing the ruthless, pragmatic mathematics of Mr. Julian's sanctuary, a heavy, sinking feeling begins to pool in the pit of your stomach. The cold, mechanical clarity of this office is a completely alien world. And as the late afternoon sun begins to cast long, distorted shadows across the carpet, you know your shift is over. Stepping out of the chilling, pragmatic sanctuary of Mr. Julian's office, you walk into the stifling heat of the late afternoon. But the true suffocation does not come from the weather. It arrives the moment you push open the front door of your own home. The air inside the dining room is heavy, laden with the aroma of a modest meal and the thick, undeniable tension of financial anxiety that has haunted these walls for as long as you can remember. But tonight, the atmosphere violently shifts. The front door swings open, and Mr. Mark, your father, steps inside. He is 50 years old, carrying the chronically exhausted posture of an academic who has spent decades fighting for recognition in a rigid bureaucracy. He wears a faded button-down shirt, his tie loosened and hanging limply around his collar, the fabric of his pleated trousers holding the deep, tired wrinkles of a long, arduous day. Yet, tonight, there is a feverish, almost desperate spark illuminating his tired eyes. In his trembling hand, he clutches a piece of paper. It is a formal notice of a promotion, a significant salary increase. Standing near the kitchen counter is Mrs. Margaret, your mother. She is 40 years old, wrapped in a thin, worn cardigan that she instinctively pulls tightly around her shoulders, as if trying to ward off a perpetual, invisible chill. When she hears the news, her face transforms. She beams, a radiant, hopeful smile breaking through the quiet exhaustion etched into her features. For a fleeting, intoxicating moment, they truly believe they have finally won the game of life. You sit down at the small dining table, a boy of 16, eating in silence as the illusion of salvation takes total control of the room. Between bites of food, they begin to weave the heavy fabric of their own doom. Mr. Mark, his voice brimming with unchecked pride and relief, declares that they will use this new, higher salary to go straight to the bank. They will finally qualify for a massive mortgage to buy a beautiful, sprawling dream house in the quiet, affluent suburbs. He leans back in his chair, adjusting his loosened tie, and pronounces the ultimate, devastating lie of the middle class with absolute conviction. This house, he says, looking at the ceiling, will be the family's greatest investment. It is our most valuable asset. The trap deepens instantly. Mrs. Margaret's eyes gleam with visions of suburban grandeur. She immediately begins planning the interior. The old, frayed couch in the living room will look entirely out of place in such a magnificent home. She casually mentions that she will swipe her credit card to purchase a luxurious, imported leather sofa set. After all, they have a higher income now. They deserve to look the part. They deserve the reward. Sitting across from them, you cannot swallow your food. Your 16-year-old stomach twists into a tight, agonizing knot. Your mind is still echoing with the cold, ruthless mathematics you absorbed just hours ago in Mr. Julian's office. You see the invisible steel jaws of the system snapping shut around your parents' ankles. You cannot simply sit there and watch them walk blindly into a financial slaughterhouse. You push your plate aside. You grab a pen and a blank sheet of paper from the side table. With deliberate, urgent strokes, you draw the exact same diagrams Mr. Julian had drawn for you 7 years ago. You sketch the 2 cash flow boxes. You draw the income statement on top, the balance sheet on the bottom. You slide the paper across the tablecloth, directly in front of your highly educated father. You look into his eyes and proceed to systematically dismantle his lifelong beliefs. You show him the terrifying, undeniable truth of his new salary. The money comes in here, you explain, pointing the tip of the pen to the income column, your voice steady but laced with a desperate plea, but it does not travel down into the asset column. Because you are buying this house, your new raise immediately drains straight out through the expenses column. You trace the invisible hemorrhaging of his hard-earned wealth, the crushing mortgage interest, the exorbitant property taxes, the inevitable maintenance fees, the staggering utility bills of a much larger space. It all flows directly into a massive liability, you say, tapping the bottom box. The house is not paying you, it is demanding that you pay it every single month for the next 30 years. You do not stop there. Armed with a chilling clarity, you ruthlessly point out the 3 devastating costs he is blindly agreeing to pay. First, the absolute waste of time. He will spend his most productive, energetic years laboring to feed a structure, rather than making that money work to generate a self-sustaining profit. Second, the complete loss of capital. His hard-earned surplus will be permanently buried in dead concrete, wood, and rubble, entirely stripped of its power to multiply and grow. And third, the most tragic loss of all, the permanent death of opportunity. Because this sprawling dream house and the brand new leather sofa will devour every single spare cent of his increased salary, he will never have any surplus money. Without surplus cash, he will permanently lose the opportunity to learn how to actually invest. He will remain financially illiterate forever, terrified of the markets, clinging to his job like a hostage clinging to his captor. You watch the weight of the words strike him. The simple, undeniable logic of a 16-year-old boy pierces straight through Mr. Mark's fragile intellectual pride. He is a 50-year-old scholar, a man respected by his academic peers, suddenly exposed as an absolute novice in the brutal, unforgiving game of survival. Academic wisdom is instantly overwhelmed by a tidal wave of visceral, uncontrollable emotion. You can see the heat rising from his collar. His skin flushes a deep, angry crimson. The veins in his neck throb against the fabric of his shirt. He cannot debate the mathematics with you, because the mathematics are flawlessly, objectively cruel. Humiliation breeds a sudden, defensive rage. With a sharp, aggressive swipe of his trembling hand, Mr. Mark tosses your piece of paper off the edge of the table. The paper flutters through the heavy air and lands softly on the linoleum floor. The faint, whispering sound of it hitting the ground marks the sudden, violent end of the argument. It is a quiet sound, yet it rings out with the finality of a heavy steel vault door slamming shut. Time passes in a suffocating, unbreakable silence. The initial, intoxicating joy of his promotion quickly fades, evaporating like a cheap mirage. It gives way to a crushing, inescapable reality. The dream house is eventually bought, the leather sofa is delivered, but the hopeful light completely dies out of his eyes. The false victory is swallowed entirely by the darkness of long, lonely, sleepless nights, as the invisible weight of a 30-year sentence settles permanently upon his tired, sloping shoulders. As time marches on, you stand in the shadows of the hallway, quietly observing Mr. Mark slowly growing old inside his magnificent, sprawling suburban fortress. The vibrant, hopeful man who once proudly announced his promotion is gone. In his place sits a man visibly burdened by the life he fought so hard to build. His posture is noticeably more hunched, his spine curving under an invisible, crushing weight. The dark hair at his temples has turned a fragile, ash gray. It is late at night. The grand house is entirely silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Mr. Mark sits completely alone at the dining table, bathed in the pale, unforgiving light of a single desk lamp. Spread out before him is a terrifying mountain of paper, bills, final notices, His prestigious, high salary, the very income that was supposed to guarantee his family's salvation, cannot save him now. The credit cards, recklessly swiped to purchase that imported leather sofa and to fill the empty rooms of this massive house, have finally reached their absolute limits. The mathematics of his life have caught up with him. Suddenly, the sharp, shrill ring of the telephone shatters the midnight silence. Mr. Mark picks up the heavy receiver with a trembling hand. On the other end of the line is Mr. Carlson, a senior representative from the bank. Mr. Carlson does not speak with the harsh, demanding tone of a debt collector. Instead, his voice drips with a sickening, manufactured kindness. He speaks like a savior descending from the heavens to rescue a drowning man. "Good evening, Mr. Mark," the voice smoothly hums through the earpiece. "We have reviewed your portfolio. The market is booming, and your beautiful home has appraised at a significantly higher value. We can help you. We can offer you a home equity loan to consolidate all of those high-interest credit card debts into one simple, manageable account. We will extend the term to 30 years. Your monthly payment will drop drastically. You will finally have room to breathe." It is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Mr. Mark, exhausted, terrified, and backed into a financial corner, closes his eyes. He accepts the offer. Days later, he signs his name on the dotted line of a thick, complex contract. As the ink dries, he leans back in his chair and exhales a long, deep sigh of relief. The crushing pressure on his chest seems to lift. He truly believes he has survived the storm. But standing in the doorway, watching this tragedy unfold, you see the brutal, unvarnished truth. You possess the chilling clarity to dissect the absolute cruelty of the rat race. That long sigh of relief escaping your father's lips is not the sound of a man finding freedom. It is the distinct, terrifying sound of a heavy, braided noose being pulled tight around his neck. He has not solved his financial crisis. He has merely institutionalized it. He has taken a series of reckless, short-term consumer debts and permanently welded them to the roof over his family's head, stretching his servitude across 3 entire decades. From that moment forward, the brutal reality of his existence is sealed. When Mr. Mark forces himself out of bed every single morning, tying his necktie with weary hands and commuting through the congested, smog-filled highways, he is no longer working to support his family. He is not working to build his own wealth or to secure his own future. He is draining his own blood, day after day, year after year, to diligently serve 3 invisible, insatiable jailers. His first jailer is the company. He grinds his bones into dust, sacrificing his evenings, his weekends, and his vitality, all to ensure that the corporate executives and the wealthy shareholders can purchase their yachts and expand their massive portfolios. His labor directly enriches men he will never even meet. His second jailer is the government. The grand illusion of his climbing the corporate ladder is a mathematical trap. The harder he works, and the higher his salary climbs, the heavier his tax burden becomes. The government punishes his ambition, slicing away a massive percentage of his earnings, taking their cut before the paycheck even touches his calloused hands. He is a premier taxpayer, blindly funding a system that keeps him securely running on the treadmill. His third and most relentless jailer is the bank. They are the quiet, smiling masters of his concrete cage. For 30 long, agonizing years, the bank will sit completely idle, producing nothing, risking nothing, while legally entitled to siphon the lion's share of his life's energy. Every month, a massive portion of his labor is handed over simply to pay the interest on the privilege of living inside his own debt. The magnificent dream house in the suburbs is not a sanctuary. It is a beautifully decorated, 30-year penitentiary. And the most tragic part of it all is that the prisoner voluntarily locked himself inside, handed the keys over to his 3 wardens, and thanked them profusely for the privilege. You stand completely still in the suffocating shadows of the hallway, watching the fragile, sloping curve of Mr. Mark's weary back. He remains anchored beneath the pale, sickly glow of the single desk lamp, a brilliant academic reduced to a terrified hostage, frantically tallying numbers that will never balance. As you watch the man who raised you slowly fold under the invisible weight of his own decisions, a specific memory cuts through the silence. It is the steady, commanding voice of Mr. Julian, echoing from that distant, cigar-smoked office, delivering a borrowed truth from a visionary named Buckminster Fuller. Wealth, the voice resonates in the quiet corridors of your mind, is not measured in dollars. It is measured exclusively in time. It is defined entirely by your ability to survive if you were to stop working tomorrow. You look at your father and apply the ruthless mathematics of that definition. Mr. Mark's income-generating assets equal exactly 0. If a sudden illness were to strike him tomorrow, if he were physically unable to endure the punishing commute and perform his daily duties, the flow of water would stop instantly. His family would survive for a matter of mere weeks. The moment the meager savings evaporated, that magnificent, sprawling suburban dream house would immediately reveal its true nature. It would cease to be a home and instantly transform into a starving predator, opening its concrete jaws to swallow him and his family entirely whole. In sharp, agonizing contrast, you know that Mr. Julian's financial tree has long since breached the deepest underground aquifers. It continues to draw water automatically, silently, and relentlessly. Mr. Julian does not need to lift a single finger to sustain his existence. He has used his intelligence to purchase the only thing on this earth that actually matters, the absolute, unshakable freedom to own the rest of his natural life. The painful realization hangs heavy in the air, but slowly, the sharp edges of the dining room begin to blur. The pale, yellow light of the desk lamp wavers, fracturing into a million glittering dust motes. The heavy silence of the past fades, dissolving and sinking deeply into an empty, absolute void. Suddenly, the dazzling, blinding light of the midday city sun pierces the darkness, pulling you violently back to reality. The deafening roar of traffic floods your ears. You are back. You are 40 years old, standing quietly beneath the sprawling protective canopy of the ancient oak tree. You lower your hand, letting your fingertips slip away from the rough, textured bark. You take a slow, deep breath of the stifling city air, consciously pushing aside the heavy ghosts of your youth. Adjusting the lapel of your navy blue blazer, you step out of the cool, quiet shade and walk directly into the blinding, unforgiving heat of the pavement. You seamlessly blend into the frantic, rushing crowd. All around you flows a ceaseless river of highly educated, business-dressed intellectuals. They are hurrying past you in sharply tailored suits, gripping heavy leather briefcases with white-knuckled intensity. Despite their impeccable outward appearances, you can easily see the truth etched deeply into their faces, the tight, drawn expressions filled with a quiet, chronic worry. They are sprinting on an invisible treadmill, terrified of slipping, terrified of stopping. You do not judge them. You do not step into the middle of the street to offer unsolicited advice or shout financial warnings. The system is operating exactly as it was perfectly designed to operate. You simply walk among them, an observer moving silently through the machinery. As you watch the endless parade of exhausted ambition, the scenario concludes with a single, silent reflection echoing in your mind. Out of all these brilliant, desperate people rushing blindly toward the horizon, how many are actually kneeling in the dirt, quietly sowing the fragile seeds for their own trees? And how many of them are simply sleepwalking, proudly locking themselves inside a concrete cage for 30 years, dedicating every waking hour to tirelessly carrying heavy buckets of water just to nourish the lush, blossoming gardens of someone else?